My name is Lena Carter. I'm 28 years old and my sister stole my husband. Then my parents chose her side. One night I stood in the hallway of the home I thought was mine, the scent of another woman's perfume clinging to Ethan's collar while he whispered the words that split my life in half, Vivian and I. We're in love. I packed my life into black trash bags. My parents' voices on the phone were flat rehearsed. The house is under renovation. Honey, it's not a good time. Renovation was a lie. What it really meant was you don't belong here anymore. 2 years later, the bell above the door of my Seattle shop chimed. Lavender and cedarwood scented the air, and there she was, Vivian hollow-eyed, clutching a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. She whispered, "I need your help." But what she didn't know was I had become someone she could no longer destroy. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted, hit like and subscribe. Your support helps me keep sharing the truths most families try to bury. I grew up in a modest brick house in Cincinnati, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, just 3 bedrooms, a patchy lawn out front, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of fried onions and pine sol. But inside those walls, a pattern took root that would shape the rest of my life. Vivian, my sister, was 3 years older, blonde, blue-eyed, loud, and confident. She had the kind of presence that filled every room, the type of kid neighbors called a natural leader. And me, I was the quiet one. Dark hair, notebooks full of sketches, and obsession with mixing lotions out of dollar store creams and whatever essential oils I could sneak from the pharmacy aisle. At dinner, the favoritism wasn't subtle, it was ritual. The clatter of forks on chipped plates, the hum of the ceiling fan. Dad's low voice asking Viv how was practice Mom would serve her the best cut of meat, lay an extra scoop of mashed potatoes on her plate. Sometimes I'd catch her glance sliding past me as if to say, "You understand, don't you?" One summer night when I was 10, cicadas screamed outside the screen door while sweat rolled down my back. I had discovered an art camp in a flyer at school, a week of sketching, painting, real classes. I gathered every drawing I'd made from pencil portraits to watercolor flowers and laid them in front of Mom like an offering. My hands shook with hope. "Please, Mom. It's just 1 week. I'll pay some with babysitting money." She gave me that polite, tight smile. "Maybe next year, sweetheart. Money's tight right now." I nodded, throat burning. 2 weeks later, Vivian announced she wanted piano lessons. A brand new keyboard appeared in the living room. The glossy keys glistened under the lamp as a private instructor tapped rhythms for her to follow. Mom stood beside her, clapping off beat, but beaming like her daughter had already stepped onto a stage at Carnegie Hall. I stood in the doorway, the sound of those plastic notes cutting into me like tiny blades. Money was never tight for Vivian. It was only tight for me. Birthdays were the clearest measure of worth. For Vivian's 16th, Dad scraped together cash for a used silver sedan. Not flashy, but freedom on 4 wheels. They tied a bow to the hood and posed for photos, neighbors clapping. I watched from the porch, a paper plate of cake in my lap, feeling like I was at someone else's celebration. When my turn came 2 years later, Mom set down a grocery store sheet cake. The pink icing read, "Happy birthday, Lena," my name spelled wrong. No car, no party, just my parents' distracted claps and Dad's comment, "We're proud of you, proud of what surviving another year invisible." Even holidays carried their hierarchy. At Christmas, Vivian unwrapped boots from Macy's and a shiny gold bracelet. My box held socks and a clearance sweater, the tag still dangling from the collar. Mom's excuse, "You're practical, Lena. We know you don't need fancy things." I swallowed it all, telling myself I was strong enough to live without. But each slight carved deeper. The worst wound of all came at high school graduation. For Vivian, they'd rented a banquet hall, invited half the town. Streamers catered food music blasting from rented speakers. My parents beamed, introducing her as our star. When it was my turn 2 years later, we had a barbecue in the backyard. A few paper plates, hot dogs, and an old stereo wheezing out static. Dad clapped my shoulder and said, "We already did the big one for Viv, so this is just low-key, low-key." The word burned into my chest like a brand. I wasn't celebrated. I was a footnote. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the back steps with the faint smell of charcoal in the air, fireflies winking in the yard. I held my diploma, the paper trembling in my hands. The stars overhead looked endless, but all I could feel was small, so small, I thought the universe might forget I existed. I didn't know it then, but that ache, the silence where love should have been, would matter later. It would become the reason I clawed my way out, the reason I couldn't stop chasing something bigger, something that belonged only to me. College was supposed to be my way out. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I had a degree in something solid, my parents would finally look at me the way they looked at Vivian. I still remember the day the envelope arrived. Heavy paper, bold lettering. "Congratulations, you've been accepted." My chest nearly burst. I ran into the living room, waving it like a trophy. "Mom, Dad, I got in. It's one of the top cosmetic science programs in the country." Mom took the letter, scanned it quickly, and that same thin smile crept onto her face. "That's wonderful, dear." "Looks expensive." Dad didn't even look up from the TV. "We're still paying off Vivian's MBA. You know we don't have a separate college fund. We'll have to see what's realistic." The joy drained out of me. I had dreamed of hearing "we're proud of you." Instead, it was just numbers on a ledger. I took out loans the size of mountains. Nights blurred into early mornings working 2 part-time jobs. My hands smelled like burnt espresso from the coffee shop. My legs ached from folding clothes at the mall. I stumbled into lectures half awake, guzzling gas station coffee. Meanwhile, Vivian was 30 back at home, living rent-free, her car insurance paid, and a small allowance slipped into her purse every week so she could go out with friends. One Christmas break I came home, rail-thin dark circles carved under my eyes. Mom clucked her tongue. "You need to take better care of yourself, Lena." Then she turned to Vivian. "We should get you a new outfit for that interview." I swallowed the bitterness, but it curdled inside me. It wasn't just money, it was attention. I won a small award junior year for a skincare formula I'd developed. My hands shook as I dialed home. Mom picked up distracted. "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Vivian's got a 3rd interview at that big firm? We really think this one's it." My achievement became her segue to gush about Vivian. My victories were stepping stones for my sister's spotlight. I promised myself something that night. If I wanted to be proud, it had to come from me. Then came Ethan. It was a rainy Saturday, the kind that made the boutique smell like wet wool and perfume samples. I was stocking shelves when the door opened and a man in a tailored suit walked in, shaking droplets from his hair. I pegged him for another guy buying a last-minute gift, but instead of heading for the display, he walked straight to me. "Do you carry facial oils with cold-pressed rosehip?" His voice was warm, curious. I blinked. "Most people just ask for whatever's popular." "I'm not most people," he said with a half smile. And then he asked about ingredients, sourcing, formulation. For nearly an hour, we talked not just about skincare, but about building something from nothing. His eyes lit up when I spoke, like I wasn't invisible, like my dreams mattered. He came back the next week, and the one after. Excuses to buy soap or a candle, but really to see me. When he finally asked me out, I panicked. I was a broke college student in Target jeans. He was a tech founder who drove a Porsche. But Ethan said, "I admire your drive. You're the most interesting person I've met in years." For the first time, someone made me feel like the star. We dated, and a year later, on a rooftop with the city glittering beneath us, he knelt with a ring. My yes came out before I could breathe. When I told my parents, Mom's first words were, "He must be doing very well for himself." Dad chuckled. "At least those student loans won't be a worry anymore." Not "congratulations," not "we're happy for you," just dollar signs. At the engagement dinner, Mom leaned close and whispered, "Ethan must have some successful friends. Maybe you can introduce Vivian." My stomach nodded. Even my happiness was mined for Vivian's benefit. The wedding was beautiful. String lights, flowers, laughter. But Vivian showed up in a champagne-colored dress that brushed too close to white. She floated between Ethan's investors, laughing too loud, her hand on arms that weren't hers to touch. Near the gift table, she pulled me aside, syrupy smile plastered on. "I'm happy for you, Lena." Then her voice dropped sharp as glass. "Just watch him. I saw him at a gala last month. Model types were all over him. Don't be naive. On my wedding day, she planted poison in my ear. I told myself she was just jealous that Ethan was mine, but that cold knot in my stomach never loosened. If I had known what was coming, I would have recognized that knot for what it was, the first crack in the life I thought I had built. The first year of marriage with Ethan felt like a dream I didn't dare breathe on in case it shattered. He encouraged me to tinker with formulas in our spare bedroom. We ordered secondhand lab equipment online. Beakers clinked on the countertop while the smell of essential oils clung to the air. At night, when I stayed up late scribbling notes, he'd send in takeout, kiss the top of my head, whisper, "You're going to change the industry one day." For once in my life, I thought I was safe. Then Vivian started showing up. At first, it was occasional, a Saturday drop-by with flimsy excuses. Then Tuesdays. Then nearly every other day. She'd sweep in polished to perfection heels, clicking on the hardwood hair, gleaming like spun gold. Thought I'd keep my little sister company, she'd chirp, but her eyes slid past me straight to Ethan. If he was in the kitchen, she'd perch on a bar stool, legs crossed, laughing too loud at his jokes. If he watched TV, she'd sprawl on the couch near him, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. Each touch, each laugh was small enough to pass as innocent, but it didn't feel innocent. I tried to ignore the burn in my stomach, but it grew unbearable. One evening, while Ethan tapped away at his laptop, I mustered courage. "Don't you think it's weird? How much Vivian's here?" He didn't look up. "She's your sister Lena. She's probably lonely. Don't be insecure." The word slammed into me. Insecure. As if my instincts, my gut twisting, were flaws. I fell silent, ashamed for even voicing it. But the pattern worsened. Ethan worked late, more often dinners with investors' meetings that ran long. When he came home, he smelled faintly of cologne and something else, something floral. As a cosmetic chemist, my nose knew jasmine layered with vanilla sharpened by amber. It wasn't one of mine. One night, he slipped in near midnight. I stood in the hallway, hands clenched. "What's that smell, Ethan?" He froze, shoulders tense. "What smell? The perfume on your collar." My voice rose steadier. "Who is she?" He turned then, and guilt draped across his face like a mask. He raked a hand through his hair, sighed the way people do before detonating a bomb. "Vivian and we're in love." Silence collapsed around me. My ears rang. My heart felt suspended mid-beat. My sister, my husband, together. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My body went cold as though someone had pulled the plug on all emotion. The next morning, while he left for work, I packed a bag. The zipper's rasp was louder than my thoughts. Desperate, I called my mother. "I need a place to stay, just for a little while." Her pause was long, clinical. "Oh, honey, I'd love to help, but the house is under renovation. Dust everywhere. There's no room." Renovation. We'd lived in that house my whole childhood. They hadn't painted a wall in 30 years. I hung up and called Dad. His voice was strained, awkward. "It's just not a good time, sweetheart. You know how it is." I dropped the phone. The thud against the carpet sounded final. In 24 hours, I'd lost my husband, my sister, and both parents. I found a dingy apartment on the worst side of town. Stained carpet mold creeping along the bathroom tiles. The air smelled perpetually damp like forgotten laundry. My life fit into 3 trash bags and a suitcase. But Ethan wasn't finished gutting me. At the boutique where I'd worked for years, my manager called me into her office. She couldn't meet my eyes. "It's restructuring. We have to let you go." I protested. My sales numbers were strong. Customers loved me, but she just repeated corporate decision. That night, a text from Mrs. Doyle, a coworker sharp-eyed kind, summoned me to a diner. She slid a slice of pie across the table. "Eat. You look like a ghost." Then she leaned in, her voice low. "It wasn't restructuring, Lena." Ethan came in. "Told the owner you were unstable, that your drama was bad for business." The owner caved. They play golf together. The fork trembled in my hand. And she continued, eyes narrowing. I overheard a call. "Ethan warned suppliers not to trust you. He's trying to scorch the earth." I gripped the Formica table until my knuckles whitened. Rage bubbled cold and clean. It wasn't enough for him to take my heart, he wanted to erase me entirely. When Mrs. Doyle dropped me at my apartment, she pressed crumpled bills into my palm. Groceries, $200. Don't let that man win. I stood at my peeling doorframe, clutching the money. An eviction notice flapped in the wind, taped to the door. I slid down to the floor, back against splintered wood, staring at that notice. Husband gone, family gone, job gone, home slipping away. For the first time I thought maybe they were right, that I was disposable, that I'd never been enough. But as night folded around me, a flicker of something else ignited. Not grief, rage, a cold, clarifying rage. They had taken everything, but they couldn't take what was in my head. The night I found the eviction notice, something inside me snapped, but not in the way they wanted. They thought I'd collapse. Instead, I made a choice. The next morning, I walked into a credit union on the other side of town, clutching the last of my savings like a lifeline. The carpet smelled like stale coffee and dust. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My hands shook as I signed the papers for a small personal loan. It wasn't much, just enough for a few months of rent and supplies. But it was oxygen. My crumbling apartment became my laboratory. I dragged in second-hand hot plates, scratched beakers from a clearance sale notebooks stacked like towers. The kitchen table groaned under bottles of oils and herbs. The first batch of serum smelled too sharp, the second separated into greasy layers. My fingers stung from constant mixing, but every failure was fuel. Nights stretched until dawn. My neighbors pounded on the walls at 2 a.m. while I scribbled formulas. I lived on instant noodles and dollar coffee eyes, bloodshot hands, blistered. But something fierce drove me. They'd tried to erase me, and this was my refusal. I called my brand Bloomin' Haven, a promise to myself that something beautiful could grow, even in ruin. At first, Etsy sales trickled. A bottle here, 2 jars there. Not enough to pay bills. My bank account bled toward zero. Then, one random Tuesday, an order came from a name I didn't recognize, Maya Kim, a beauty blogger in California. I packaged that serum like it was holy, wrapped it in tissue paper, tied it with twine. Days later, I woke to my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications piled like fireworks. Maya had posted a video review. She held my serum to the camera, eyes wide. This is my holy grail. Woman-owned, organic, unlike anything else I've tried. By morning, every product in my shop was sold out. I cried messy, gasping sobs at the sight of those notifications. For the first time, the world outside my small, cruel family saw me. Orders poured in. I worked 18-hour days labeling, bottling, shipping until my hands blistered. My apartment reeked of lavender and cardboard. Sleep became a luxury, but exhaustion tasted sweeter than despair. 6 months later, I repaid my loan in full. With trembling hands, I signed a lease on a small studio space in Seattle. Concrete floors, one long window streaked with rain. I set up shelves, painted the walls myself. When I locked the door that first night, keys biting my palm, tears slid down my cheeks. It wasn't just a studio, it was freedom carved from ashes. I left Ohio without goodbyes. No parents waving, no sister sneering, no husband lurking. Just me, a beat-up car, and boxes of products rattling in the back seat. Seattle was damp and gray, but to me, it gleamed. I poured everything into Bloomin' Haven. Each label I designed, each formula I perfected carried defiance. And slowly, customers became loyal fans. There were setbacks. One supplier dropped me after a concerned call, Ethan's voice, disguised but recognizable. Some nights, I still woke in a sweat hearing Vivian's taunt, "Don't be naive." But I pressed harder. At a local craft fair, my booth smelled of chamomile and bergamot. Strangers paused, tried samples, smiled. One woman bought 3 bottles, returning an hour later with friends. That night, my sales doubled. Momentum built like a tide. By 27, I had saved enough to open my first storefront. The glass window bore my name, Bloom and Haven. Rows of amber bottles lined reclaimed wood shelves. Lavender and cedar filled the air. Customers stepped in and sighed like they'd found refuge. And in a way they had, because this place was my haven too. Still, memories clung like shadows. On quiet nights, I'd stand at the counter recalling the sheet cake with my misspelled name, the word low-key echoing in my ears. Those wounds didn't vanish. They hardened into resolve. I didn't know it yet, but all that pain, all those sleepless nights were shaping the moment that would come 2 years later. The moment the bell over that shop door would ring and Vivian would walk back into my life with hollow eyes and a baby in her arms. But before that reckoning, I stood in my shop, inhaled the scent of everything I'd built, and whispered to myself, they didn't destroy me. They forged me. Seattle's rain had a way of making the streets shine like dark glass at night. I used to think it was cleansing, but during those years, it felt more like the city itself was watching me, waiting for me to slip. Bloomhaven was growing, but shadows followed me everywhere. It started with Vivian. One Saturday afternoon, I was restocking shelves when I saw a familiar profile across the street. Blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, hands clutching a designer bag. She wasn't alone. Ethan trailed half a step behind her phone, glued to his ear. My throat locked. 2 years since the betrayal, and there they were strolling past my shop like tourists. They didn't come inside that day, but the message was clear. They knew where I was. The next week, a shipment from a supplier in Oregon never arrived. I called frantic. The owner's voice was hesitant. Look, Lena, we got a call. Someone warned us you're unreliable. Said you burn bridges. We can't risk it. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I didn't need to ask who had called. Ethan's fingerprints were all over it. I paced my studio that night, rage clawing at my ribs. He had already gutted me once, left me with nothing but trash bags and debt. Now he wanted to strangle Bloomhaven before it could bloom at all. But I refused to bow. I reached out to smaller farms, family-run, harder to bully. It was more expensive, more complicated, but every jar I poured felt like defiance bottled. Still, paranoia crept in. At the grocery store, I swore I saw a man following me down the aisles. At the post office, a stranger lingered too long behind me. When I told Mrs. Doyle, she pressed her lips tight. He's watching you, Lena. I wouldn't put it past him to have someone tail you. Her words chilled me. One evening after closing, I found an envelope wedged under my shop door. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. You'll never outgrow what you are. The handwriting wasn't Ethan's or Vivian's, but it didn't matter. The poison was the same. I sat on the floor of my shop, envelope in my lap, lavender scent heavy in the air. For a moment, I almost believed it, that no matter how hard I fought, I'd always be second best, disposable, invisible. But then I thought of the women who walked through my door, the customers who smiled when they found something that healed their skin, their confidence. I wasn't worthless. I mattered to them, and I had to matter to myself. Still, the attacks escalated. At a local artisan fair, I set up my booth with rows of oils and creams. The air smelled of cinnamon from nearby stalls, laughter echoing down the aisles. For the first hour, sales were strong. Then, a woman marched up, slammed a bottle onto my table, and spat. This burned my skin. You're a fraud. My stomach dropped. I took the bottle back, heart pounding. The label was mine, but the contents were wrong. Rancid oil off color, a smell that made my eyes water. Sabotage. Other customers overheard whispering. My hands trembled as I tried to explain, but the woman stormed off. I knew whose shadow was behind it. That night, I scrubbed my hands, raw tears mixing with soap. Every step forward, Ethan and Vivian tried to drag me 2 steps back. But nothing cut deeper than the betrayal that came from my own parents. Scrolling social media one evening, I froze at a photo, Vivian grinning in a new condo, glass of champagne in hand. And beside her, Mom and Dad. Captions full of family first, proud of our girl. They had sold the lie about the renovation. They hadn't been too busy or too strapped. They had simply chosen Vivian. Again. I shut my laptop chest, heaving. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew the truth. I was never their first choice. I was never their choice at all. I tried to channel the fury into work, but it followed me everywhere. When I lay in bed, I replayed Dad's awkward voice saying, "It's not a good time, sweetheart." When I stirred oils in my lab, I heard Vivian's hiss, "Don't be naive." The world outside saw me as a success story, a woman-owned business thriving against odds. But inside, I was still fighting ghosts with every breath. And what I didn't realize was that the worst was still ahead, that Ethan and Vivian hadn't even played their final cards yet. The weeks after the artisan fair felt like walking on glass. Every time I turned a corner, I braced for another attack. And they always came. One rainy Tuesday, I got a call from my landlord. His voice was clipped, embarrassed. "Ms. Carter, I've been approached. Someone told me you run dangerous experiments in your unit chemicals fire hazards. My insurance company is nervous." I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of my shop window, rain streaking down on the other side. "That's not true," I whispered. "I'm sorry," he said, but his tone wasn't sorry at all. "Keep it clean or I'll have to reconsider your lease." I hung up, fists trembling. Ethan was choking me from every angle, supplier's reputation, even my roof. And still, Vivian found ways to needle me. One evening, I opened my inbox to find an email chain between her and my parents accidentally forwarded. My name was in the subject line. If Lena had managed money better, she wouldn't be struggling so much, Mom had typed. Vivian replied, "She's always been irresponsible. Remember when she borrowed money and never paid it back?" I blinked at the screen bile rising. Borrowed money? I had never taken a dime from them. Then it hit me Vivian had borrowed under my name. Years ago, when I was in college, she must have spun some story, used me as the scapegoat. No wonder Dad's eyes had narrowed when I'd asked for help back then. The betrayal wasn't just in the present, it had roots deep in the past. I sat at my desk, fists pressed to my temples, rage and shame tangling together. For a moment, I almost wanted to give up, to let Bloom and Haven fold pack a bag vanish somewhere no one knew me. But then my phone buzzed with an order notification. Then another, and another. Strangers, customers still believed in me. And if they could, then maybe I had to believe in myself too. Still, the cracks widened. At a small networking event downtown, I pitched my products to a boutique owner. Her eyes flicked to my card, then back to me. "I've heard things," she said flatly. "That you're volatile, unstable." My chest burned. Ethan's words, repeated by others, spread like rot. I smiled anyway, the kind of cold smile I'd learned from years of swallowing pain. "You'll believe what you see. Try the product. Then decide." She hesitated, pocketed the sample. I walked away on shaking legs, praying she'd see the truth. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the night that nearly broke me. I was closing the shop lights dim when the bell above the door jingled. A man I didn't recognize stepped in, hood dripping rain. His eyes darted around the shelves. "We're closed," I said, voice steady, though my stomach tightened. He smirked. "Just wanted to see the miracle girl, the one who thinks she's better than her sister." My blood ran cold. Vivian had sent him maybe Ethan too. He leaned closer. "Word is, you're just playing scientist. Maybe you should quit before something bad happens." I gripped the counter so hard my nails dug grooves into the wood. "Get out," I said low and sharp. He chuckled, turned, and left. The door shut with a final chime, leaving the shop thick with lavender and fear. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, sat clutching a kitchen knife until dawn. By morning, something inside me hardened. If they wanted me to crumble, they'd have to do more than send shadows. I threw myself into the work. New formulas, richer scents, bolder branding. For every whisper they spread, I gave my customers truth in a bottle. Word of mouth carried faster than rumor. Slowly, the tide shifted. Still, Vivian wasn't finished. She appeared one Sunday afternoon, brazen as ever, walking into Bloom and Haven with sunglasses perched on her head. "Nice place," she said, running her manicured fingers along a display shelf. I almost didn't recognize it. "So, professional." I folded my arms. "Why are you here?" She shrugged. "Ethan thinks you're getting too big for your britches. I told him don't worry, Lena always manages to ruin things herself." Her smile was sugar and venom. I felt the old urge to scream to demand why. But instead, I simply stared, silence heavier than any words. Her smirk faltered. She left without buying a thing. That was when I realized my silence was louder than her cruelty. The attacks didn't stop, but something shifted in me. Each attempt to break me proved I was still standing. Each lie they told exposed their desperation. The breaking point wasn't a single event. It was the accumulation of every whisper, every sabotage, every night spent guarding my door. I reached it one evening staring at a wall of filled orders ready to ship. My hands ached, my back throbbed, but the shelves were full. The shop was alive. And I whispered to myself, voice shaking but fierce, "You tried to erase me, but I'm still here." I didn't know then that the climax was approaching that. Soon, Vivian herself would walk back through my door, not to mock me, but to beg. And that would be the moment everything shifted. The sky over Seattle that afternoon was a sheet of dull steel. Rain tapped against the shop window like impatient fingers. I was rearranging a display of serums when the bell above the door chimed. That sound, usually soft welcoming, split the air like a blade. I looked up. Vivian stood there. For a second, my mind refused to register her. She looked nothing like the golden child who had once floated through parties in sparkling dresses. Her hair, once sleek and styled, was knotted in a messy bun. Her coat was thin, damp at the hem, and in her arms, bundled in a cheap, fraying blanket, was a baby. The smell of rain clung to her, mixed with desperation. My hands flattened against the cool marble counter. I didn't move. "Lena," she whispered, her voice cracked. I didn't know where else to go. The baby fussed a weak cry muffled by the blanket. Vivian adjusted her grip, eyes flicking around the shop, my shelves, my displays, the world I had built without her. For just a flicker of a moment, I saw it envy, sharp and bitter, before it drowned beneath her tears. "Please," she stammered. "I need help." The silence stretched. Lavender and cedarwood filled the air, but my veins ran ice. 2 years ago, she had ripped my life apart and left me bleeding in the wreckage. Now she stood in my sanctuary, clutching the consequences of her choices. I forced words past my lips, steady and cold. "You need help from me." Her eyes filled. "Mark." She caught herself. "Ethan." He threw me out, cut me off completely. I tilted my head. "Why, I thought you two were the perfect couple. In love, wasn't that what you said?" She flinched. I made a mistake. I was lonely." A bitter laugh scraped my throat. "Which mistake are we talking about? Vivian sleeping with my husband, letting Mom and Dad slam the door in my face? Or something else?" Her tears came faster, thick and messy. "The baby." She looked down, lips trembling. My heart thudded slow and heavy. "What about the baby?" Her voice cracked like glass. "He's not Ethan's." The words dropped between us like a bomb. For a moment, all I heard was the rain hammering the window, the baby's soft whimper. My jaw went slack. She hadn't just stolen my husband, she had lied to him, built a new life on a rotting foundation, and now it was collapsing in her arms. I stared at the child-innocent eyes peeking from the blanket, and a flicker of pity shot through me. But when I looked back at Vivian, that pity froze solid. "You mean to tell me," I said, voice like a knife's edge, "you destroyed my life for a man you cheated on? You had another man's baby while living off Ethan's money. And now when it's all gone, you come here for me to fix it." She sobbed harder. "I have nothing, Lena. No money, no home. Our parents, they can't help anymore. You're all I have left." I almost laughed. The audacity, the sheer nerve. I stepped out from behind the counter, heels clicking on the floor. My movements were slow, deliberate. I walked past her, each step slicing the silence until I reached the door. The metal handle was cold under my palm as I pulled it open. The wind rushed in sharp and unforgiving. "You are not my problem anymore," I said. Vivian's mouth fell open as if she truly couldn't comprehend rejection, as if after all she had done, she still expected me to rescue her. You made your choices. I continued, locking my gaze into hers. Now you live with them, or take them to mom and dad. But you don't bring them here. Her shoulders shook, broken sobs spilling out. The baby cried louder, writhing in her arms. Still, I didn't move. For a long moment, she just stood there staring at me as though waiting for the old Lena, the one who swallowed her pain, who stepped aside, who always took the scraps to reappear. But she was gone. Finally, Vivian turned. The doorbell chimed softly as she stepped into the cold. Her figure shrank against the gray street until she disappeared into the rain. I closed the door. The heavy glass sealed shut with a click. The lock slid into place, firm and final. The sound was the most satisfying music I had ever heard. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left outside. I stood behind the glass door long after Vivian's figure dissolved into the rain. The baby's faint cries still echoed in my ears, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. For years, I had been the one shut out, watching through windows while my family celebrated Vivian's victories, hearing doors slam in my face when I begged for help. Now it was me closing the door, and God, it felt like reclaiming my life. But the story didn't end with that single moment. Whispers traveled fast in Seattle's business circles. Within weeks, I heard fragments Vivian's attempt to paint herself as a victim online had backfired. She'd posted long, teary captions on Instagram how Ethan had abandoned her, how she was left a single mother fighting against cruelty. But screenshots surfaced of her messages with another man, the real father of her child. Her own words betrayed her. The internet did what it always does, it devoured her. Comments tore her apart, not with sympathy but scorn. Investors Ethan had courted pulled away afraid of scandal. A deal he had boasted about collapsed overnight. And then, inevitably, Ethan showed up. It was late evening. The shop was closed, shelves glimmering in the soft lamplight. I heard the knock and almost ignored it. But something in the rhythm made me pause. When I opened the door, he was there. Ethan looked nothing like the man who once strode into boutiques with confidence radiating off him. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow stubble crawling across his jaw. "Lena," he said, voice raw. "We need to talk." The audacity almost made me laugh. I didn't step aside. What could you possibly have to say? He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tick I once found endearing. Now, it was pathetic. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. Vivian? She ruined everything. She cheated, she lied. She's destroyed me. His eyes shimmered desperate. But you were always the one who believed in me. Can't we start over? The words hung heavy like smoke choking the room. I let silence stretch until his shoulders sagged. Then I spoke each syllable sharp. The Lena you broke doesn't live here anymore. The woman standing in front of you built a life you have no place in. He flinched. For a fleeting second, I saw recognition in his eyes, the realization that the girl he'd once manipulated was gone, replaced by someone untouchable. "Get out," I said. He hesitated, then turned, stepping into the night. No fight, no more words, just the hollow figure of a man who had finally lost. I locked the door behind him, the second lock clicking like punctuation on a chapter. Later word reached me of my parents. They had sold the family home, the house where I'd begged for art camp, where Vivian had unwrapped her shiny car, where I'd eaten misspelled birthday cake. They sold it to cover Vivian's debts, to bail her out one more time. And after all that, she abandoned them too, running off with the child's real father. Now, my parents lived in a cramped two-bedroom condo on the outskirts of town. Dad drove deliveries for extra cash. Mom hemmed pants in the living room. And still no apology ever came. But I didn't need it anymore, because every time the bell above my shop chimed, and a customer walked in, every time I printed a shipping label for an order across the country, every time I looked into Nathan's kind eyes, I knew I had won. Not by destroying them, but by refusing to let them destroy me. Standing in Bloomin' Haven, the shelves lined with amber bottles, I breathed in the scent of lavender cedar and something else, something new. Hope. The ghosts of my past were gone, and in their place stood me, whole. Seattle's spring arrived quiet that year. Rain, softer trees dusted with green. Bloom and Haven had survived every whisper, every shadow thrown at it, and now the shelves gleamed fuller than ever. Customers came not just for products, but for refuge. They'd lean on the counter, tell me about breakups, bad bosses, betrayals of their own. And I'd listen, offering more than a serum. I offered proof that survival was possible. But the echoes of the past hadn't gone silent. They trickled back in fragments, stories carried to me like gossip in the wind. Vivian tried to claw her way back online. She posted curated photos, hired photographers, dressed her baby in designer knockoffs. Her captions dripped with pity, just a single mom abandoned by everyone. But people weren't fooled anymore. Screenshots of her affair resurfaced. Old friends unfollowed. Even the brand partnerships she'd courted quietly withdrew. One evening, a former classmate messaged me, "Saw your sister on Facebook, begging for a GoFundMe. People are roasting her in the comments. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't respond. I didn't even click the link, because the truth was I no longer needed to watch her crumble. She was doing that all on her own. Ethan's downfall wasn't slower, it was brutal. His startup had been shaky for months, but after the scandal with Vivian, investors fled. One deal collapsed so publicly it made the business section of the paper. A headline with his name once celebrated now paired with the word bankrupt. And still, he'd shown up at my door asking for another chance. Sometimes I wondered if he believed his own words, if he thought I'd simply forget the prenup that stripped me bare, the calls that got me fired, the suppliers he'd poisoned against me. But the look in his eyes that night wasn't love. It was desperation, pure and selfish. The kind of desperation I had lived with on that apartment floor eviction notice taped to the door. The difference was I had turned mine into fuel. He was letting his consume him. As for my parents, the story was almost too predictable. They sold the house, the very house that had been denied to me during renovations, to bail Vivian out of her wreckage. They poured decades of savings into her debts, and then she left them anyway. I heard from a distant cousin that they now lived in a cramped condo, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, neighbors who argued too loud at night. My dad picked up shifts delivering groceries. My mom hemmed pants in the living room, the hum of a sewing machine where laughter should have been. No call ever came. No apology, no acknowledgement. But I didn't need it anymore, because every choice they had made, every party for Vivian, every dollar handed to her, every door slammed in my face, had led me here, to a life that was mine alone. And it wasn't just survival anymore, it was growth. Bloom and Haven expanded into a second location, sunlight streaming through larger windows, shelves stretching higher. Online orders poured in from states I'd never set foot in: Texas, Maine, Alaska. Each label I printed felt like proof that I had outgrown the cage they tried to keep me in. One morning, I brewed coffee in the back office, scrolling through an email from a national retailer. They wanted to stock Bloom and Haven. It should have felt like a dream come true, and in some ways, it did. But I closed the email heart steady. Growth was intoxicating, but I had learned the price of chasing someone else's validation. I would expand on my terms, not theirs, because the sweetest revenge wasn't proving myself to them. It was no longer needing to. And then there was Nathan. He wasn't like Ethan, no flashy entrances, no practiced charm. He was an architect with ink-stained fingers from sketching blueprints, a laugh that cracked wide, and genuine a steadiness that made the world feel less sharp. We met when he wandered into the shop, looking for something to help with the stress lines on his skin. He stayed because of the conversations about design, about building spaces that felt like home. With Nathan, I never felt like a shadow. He saw me, all of me, and he didn't flinch. When he asked me to marry him, it wasn't on a rooftop with champagne. It was on a quiet morning coffee steaming between us, blueprints and product labels scattered across the table. He slid a simple ring across the wood. "You've built your own haven. Can I be part of it?" My yes was steady, sure. "We're planning a small ceremony, nothing grand, no banquet halls. Just the people who stood by me when the world collapsed. Friends not family by blood, but by choice. And I'm designing a custom scent for that day." Notes of cedar bergamot and a hint of rose. I'll call it first light, because that's what this is, a new dawn. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the ghosts. Dad's voice saying, "We already did the big one for Vivian." Mom's cool tone. "The house is under renovation." Ethan's sigh before his confession. Vivian's whisper on my wedding day. "Don't be naive." But those voices don't break me anymore. They remind me of what I survived. They remind me of the weapon they handed me without realizing the fire to build a life they could never touch. And so when the bell above the shop door rings now, I don't brace for ghosts. I look up, smile, and welcome whoever walks through, because this haven is mine. And if they ever come back, Vivian, Ethan, even my parents, they won't find the girl they once crushed. They'll find a woman who learned the sweetest revenge is simply this: living a life so full, so untouchable, that their absence feels like freedom. What they didn't know was that in trying to bury me, they handed me the soil I needed to grow. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. My story may sound extreme, but betrayal comes in many forms. Sometimes it's loud and cruel. Sometimes it's a quiet dismissal that cuts even deeper. If any part of my journey resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join me here. This isn't just a channel, it's a community where voices like ours can finally be heard. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing at that door?